Hello, glad to see you on the channel. Subscribe, give a like, and don't forget to leave a comment. Enjoy watching.
I always knew it was coming, but that didn't make it sting any less when it finally hit. Like waiting for a punch all day and still getting the wind knocked out of you. It was a Tuesday, because of course it was, and the sun was doing that smug thing it does when it streams in through glass conference room walls like it's trying to cheer you up. I sat in a room that I had helped design. Literally, back when we were remodeling the floor plan to foster transparency and trust, and stared across the table at Valerie Knox, our new CEO with perfect teeth, a management book in her bag, and not a single ounce of shame in her expensive blazer. She didn't even offer coffee. Just opened her laptop like we were going to review metrics, and then said it with that kind of breezy confidence that tells you she's done this before. We want a clean slate, Mark. Just like that. No build-up, no apology, not even a soft landing like, "You've done great work." She didn't want great work. She wanted a purge. A rebranding. A headline on LinkedIn that said, "New era begins." I was the before photo she was cutting out of the picture. And you know what I did? I nodded. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. And I didn't beg. I just folded my hands like a man who'd been through worse and said, "I understand." Which wasn't entirely true, because part of me didn't understand. Part of me wanted to reach across the table and ask her if she had any idea what the hell she was doing. If she had any clue how many late nights, emergency weekends, skipped anniversaries, and unpaid on-calls were buried under her clean slate. But I said none of that. I just smiled, not warmly, not bitterly, just flat. What she didn't notice was that while she was talking about evolution and streamlining operations and empowering new voices, I was already reviewing the systems in my head. Because I knew them better than anyone. Not just the technical back-end, the firewalls, the data protocols, the disaster recovery setups, but the workarounds, the human hacks, the shortcuts that got us through every screw-up this company had ever made. I was the one they called when a migration failed at 2 in the morning. I was the guy who fixed the CFO's mess when someone accidentally sent unreleased earnings to the wrong vendor. I built this place with my fingerprints on every surface, and now she wanted to wash them all off like they were stains. I walked out of that meeting with my access badge still active and a polite, "We'll be in touch about the transition plan" email waiting in my inbox. She didn't realize what a gift she'd just given me. She thought I was defeated. Thought I'd pack up my desk, take the severance, and shuffle off into obscurity like a good soldier. But I didn't touch a single box. I didn't even close my laptop. I sat back down at my desk, opened up the admin console, and started thinking. Here's the part they never understand. When someone like me gets pushed out, we don't burn the place down. We don't need to. All we have to do is step back and watch. Because when the people taking over have no idea what they've inherited, the collapse is inevitable. I didn't delete a single thing. Didn't hide files or sabotage code or lock anyone out. I just left everything exactly where it was, knowing full well that they wouldn't know how to find half of it. I had documents saved from 10 years ago that were still referenced by current workflows. I had shell scripts embedded in scheduled tasks that would fail silently if you touched the wrong dependency. I had entire sections of system logic that lived only in my head, because documenting it would have taken twice as long as just keeping it running. Valerie wanted a clean slate, but what she got was a haunted house. Be honest, what would you do if your new boss smiled while wiping out everything you've spent your career building? I remember one specific line from that meeting that stuck in my head like a splinter. She said, "We need to build a future that's not tied to the past." And I thought, that's funny, because the future you're walking into is built entirely on the bones of people like me. And you just kicked one of the last ones out the door. I started getting the usual emails right after. HR paperwork, exit surveys, a knowledge transfer plan, filled with vague bullet points written by someone who'd clearly never logged into a production environment in their life. My favorite one was from some junior analyst who'd only been on the team 6 months. He asked, "Hey Mark, do we have a backup of the archival batch process you ran last year?" I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because the backup existed, I'd just never told anyone where it was. And I wasn't going to now. In my final 2 weeks, no one checked in on me. Valerie never came by again. The few people who still remembered what I'd done here gave me that awkward half-smile you give a man in a hospice bed, respectful, but distant. No one wanted to be seen getting too close. Careers were shifting. Alliances were forming. It's amazing how fast respect turns into radio silence when there's a shakeup in the C-suite. So I gave them what they asked for. A clean slate. I cleared my desk, but not my hard drive. I handed off the admin logins, but not the nuance. I uploaded the documentation, but not the knowledge. I left them the skeleton, but not the marrow. Because Valerie didn't just fire a guy, she amputated the company's memory. And now, the only thing standing between them and 1,000 little disasters is the clock. Tick, tick, tick. I joined the company back when it was little more than a name on a banner taped to a window in a shared office space, the kind of operation where the walls didn't quite reach the ceiling and the coffee machine was a donation from someone's garage. The year was 2011, and I remember because I had just shaved off the last trace of idealism left over from my startup years and was ready to work somewhere that felt stable, predictable. Something I could build into a career instead of another cautionary tale. The job description was vague, the salary was modest, and the interview process felt like a disorganized scavenger hunt, but there was a certain scrappiness to the place that I liked. They were growing, chaotic, and in desperate need of someone who could bring order to the madness without killing the spark. That became my job, unofficially at first, and then slowly in name. I started as a systems engineer, which sounds specific but meant absolutely everything. One day, I was debugging a payroll script written by someone who swore they took a coding class once, and the next I was negotiating with a data center vendor to keep our servers from getting shut down because of a missed invoice. Titles didn't matter. If it broke, I fixed it. If it was confusing, I simplified it. And if it was on fire, I was the guy running toward it with a laptop and a half-empty Red Bull. I never said no, because I believed that the more I knew, the more valuable I became. That was my first mistake. The second was thinking value meant security. In those early years, I didn't care about recognition. I was happy being the guy behind the curtain, pulling levers and making sure the show didn't fall apart. I was there when we hit our first million in revenue. I was there when we onboarded our first Fortune 500 client and nearly crashed the system because no one thought to test for that volume of activity. I was the one who patched it in real time while the sales team high-fived each other in the break room. Nobody noticed, and I didn't mind. I figured the right people knew. Turns out, the right people leave. And the new ones don't always care about the ghosts who built the place. 3 reorganizations came and went during my tenure. The first one was a genuine attempt to scale, a little messy, but mostly well-intentioned. That's when we moved into our real office, got keycards, and hired an HR director who knew what an employee handbook was. I got promoted to lead systems architect, which meant I was finally paid for the overtime I was already doing. The second reorg was more political. We brought in consultants with buzzwords and glossy decks who spent 3 months observing us before suggesting radical alignment strategies, which basically meant laying off 2 departments and renaming everything. I survived that one too, though I noticed that my name wasn't showing up in as many presentations, and some of my ideas were suddenly getting attributed to people who had been hired 3 months earlier. By the third reorg, I should have seen it coming. That was the one where the company hired Valerie, our future CEO, originally as a transformation officer, a title that should have set off alarms in every hallway. Her first act was to move engineering under product, which made no sense unless you were trying to consolidate power. Her second act was to quietly audit all senior staff with the kind of detached smile that says, "I'm not here to understand. I'm here to evaluate." I didn't protest. I just kept working, assuming my track record would speak for itself. That was the stupidest thing I've ever done. Because track records don't speak. Not when the people reading them only care about headlines and quarterly optics. I watched as colleagues I mentored got promoted past me. I sat through meetings where consultants repeated my ideas, only louder and with a slide deck. I submitted project roadmaps that got shelved, only to watch pieces of them resurface under someone else's name months later. And slowly, piece by piece, they chipped away at what I was allowed to own. They changed my title to Senior Technical Strategist, which is the kind of label you give to someone you're not sure what to do with, but don't want to fire yet. They pulled me off projects I'd launched, reassigned teams I built, and gave me just enough responsibility to keep me busy, but not enough to matter. It was death by 1,000 reassignments, and I was too tired, or maybe too proud, to fight every one of them. I figured if I kept my head down and stayed indispensable, they'd have no choice but to keep me around. Turns out, they didn't need to replace me. They just needed to outgrow me. The worst part wasn't the meetings I stopped getting invited to, or the way people started asking Brad, some shiny new MBA hire, for insight on systems I designed. It was the day I realized no one remembered the ransomware scare in 2014. The day our entire infrastructure got locked down by a cryptovirus planted through an outdated vendor login, and I stayed awake for 36 straight hours rebuilding our network from scratch while legal tried to decide if we should go public. I fixed it. Quietly. Efficiently. And then I went home, slept for 2 hours, and came back the next morning like nothing had happened. That was the moment I should have written my name in the damn firewall. So when Valerie looked me in the eye and said, "We want a clean slate," what she was really saying was, "We've erased your legacy so completely that we think we can start fresh without it." And maybe she can. Maybe the company will keep going without me, or maybe it'll stumble just enough to realize that some slates shouldn't be wiped clean. They should be studied. But now, I see the truth for what it was. I wasn't irreplaceable. I was invisible. Useful, quiet, loyal, but ultimately expendable in a world where value is measured in presentation slides and not uptime reports. My biggest mistake wasn't giving them everything. It was assuming they'd remember who gave it. They won't. But I do. And that's going to matter soon enough. There's a kind of smug assumption corporate leadership makes when they push a veteran employee out the door, especially someone like me, who spent over a decade keeping the guts of the operation stitched together while everyone else played musical chairs with job titles. They think once you're transitioning, you've emotionally clocked out, that you'll either go out bitter and loud or quietly and defeated. But there's a third option, one they never see coming, and that's leaving on your own terms with a little architecture left behind that they won't even realize they're standing on until the floor shifts beneath them. The moment I got the official transition schedule from HR, a bland calendar invite paired with a "let us know if you need support" message that read like it was copied and pasted, I knew exactly what game they thought we were playing. They expected me to hand off passwords, document process steps, provide knowledge transfer sessions, and wrap it all up with a neat little bow so someone half my age and twice my salary could smile, nod, and take credit for keeping the lights on. But I wasn't interested in torching the place, and I wasn't going to give them anything extra either. I was done building cathedrals for people who didn't respect the foundation. So I opened a blank Confluence page, the company's internal documentation tool, for those lucky enough not to know, and I started writing. Not with malice, not with spite, but with precision. I documented everything they asked for, but not a word more. I gave them what they wanted in the most literal, legal, emotionally sterile way possible. No color commentary. No war stories. No shortcuts. Just steps. Just syntax. Just enough for them to feel safe. When I handed over system credentials, I included passwords, but not the layered logic behind the tools. I made sure every admin login had two-factor enabled, but didn't mention which authentication device was tied to which process. I filled in every field of their stupid knowledge transfer spreadsheet with dry, technical language stripped of all nuance. Where they expected guidance, they got a GPS coordinate dropped in the middle of a forest with no road signs. They didn't notice. Not yet. Because people like Valerie, the ones who sit at the top and only interact with the business through dashboards and weekly reports, they think documentation is the same thing as understanding. It's not. I labeled every known bug in our issue tracker as low priority, even the ones that had quietly caused weeks of performance lags over the past fiscal year. I didn't lie. I just didn't correct their assumptions. One of them was tied to an API dependency that we'd patched with a time-based script I wrote during a blizzard at 2 in the morning. I never documented the workaround because I didn't think anyone else needed to know, and to be honest, I didn't trust anyone else not to mess with it. I still don't. That script is still running, tucked into a scheduled job that fires every Monday morning at 6 a.m. sharp. If it ever fails, payroll data starts duplicating itself. They'll find out eventually. Hopefully not during a board review. Now, there was one system in particular, the quiet linchpin, that I knew better than anyone. It was built before the last reorg, integrated directly into our financial ops, and for years had been the invisible glue that kept a dozen other subsystems talking to each other without choking. It was never officially documented because no one ever asked. People assumed it just worked. And it did, because I kept it that way. I named it something boring in our system index, Legacy Ops Daemon, and set it to update silently with every quarterly patch. No one looked at it twice. In my transition materials, I listed it, gave a one-sentence summary, and left it at that. No diagrams. No warnings. No explanation of the cascading failure that would happen if someone disabled it during a future upgrade cycle. It's not sabotage. It's just the kind of system that demands respect. And right now, it's in the hands of people who think respect is a Slack emoji. During my official exit interview, which took place over Zoom, of course, because nothing screams human connection like a video chat scheduled between two other back-to-back meetings, I was asked, "What do you think your biggest contribution was?" I looked directly into the camera, nodded thoughtfully, and said, "Stability." The HR rep smiled like she understood. She didn't, and I didn't elaborate. Why should I? The people who mattered knew what that meant. The rest never will. I created a final document titled System Transition Reference, Legacy Infrastructure. Inside were links to every process I'd touched, sorted alphabetically, each one with a note like status, operational, or status, scheduled for review. What I didn't mention was that many of those scheduled items had been flagged by me in past meetings, flagged, dismissed, shelved, or straight up ignored. That document wasn't just a list. It was a map. A calm, quiet breadcrumb trail leading directly through a minefield of executive neglect and leadership arrogance. All it needed was someone curious enough to follow it. And you know what? They probably won't. Not yet. Not until something breaks. Not until the new team tries to consolidate vendors or shift platforms or do something innovative that makes them feel like they've earned their salaries. Then someone will see one of my notes or try to trace a failure, and they'll end up staring at a comment labeled deprecated process. Do not modify. They'll modify it. They always do. And then they'll remember my name, not with anger, not even with admiration, but with confusion. Why would he leave it like that? They'll ask. The answer is simple. Because I left exactly what they asked for. Not more. Not less. Just enough. They thought my exit interview was a formality. They thought my documentation was a handoff. They thought I would fade into the background like a good little ghost. But I didn't vanish. I left a map. Now let's see who's smart enough to read it. It started, as these things often do, with a migration, one of those shiny buzzword-laced initiatives companies love to announce when they're trying to prove they're evolving, streamlining processes, or modernizing infrastructure. Or whatever other phrase a consultant whispered into a boardroom 3 weeks earlier. I heard about it secondhand, through a former teammate who still had enough loyalty to drop me a vague text that said, "They're touching the spine." You called it. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I already knew exactly which system they were messing with, and I could picture the disaster unfolding in real time like I'd written the script months earlier. 2 months had passed since I handed in my badge and walked out of the building with my files untouched, my folders unemptied, and my conscience surprisingly light. They wanted a clean slate, remember? Well, the thing about clean slates is they erase the names of the people who remember how the old machinery actually runs. And Valerie, sharp blazer, firm handshake, no history in engineering, had erased mine with confidence. She'd walked into the building with a smile, called me a legacy asset, and sent me packing like a box of dusty cables no one wants to admit they still need. The migration they launched was supposed to reroute core processes, payroll, inventory, procurement, into a shiny new platform run by a third-party vendor that specialized in cloud-integrated operational ecosystems. I'd warned about that vendor before, flagged them 2 years ago in a memo titled Vendor Due Diligence, Concerns and Alternatives, which, last I checked, had never been opened by anyone above the director level. They were fast, cheap, and riddled with short-term thinking. The kind of outfit that promises you fireworks and delivers a sparkler with a 3-second burn time. On a Monday morning, 2 minutes past 8, the first outage hit. It wasn't dramatic, not at first. Just a hiccup in the procurement pipeline, a delay that caused a few pending orders to loop back in duplicate. By 10 a.m., the inventory system had logged a negative stock count for a product we hadn't carried in over a year. By noon, payroll failed to execute its scheduled disbursement batch. Not for everyone, just for employees listed under a specific department code that, coincidentally, had been restructured without updating the dependent logic I'd written 6 years ago. A logic I had flagged as fragile under automation shift in a file labeled legacy_stability_risks.pdf, stored in a folder titled Legacy Knowledge, archived. That folder, according to the system logs, had been accessed exactly once after my departure, on my last day. The failures weren't catastrophic at first, but they were cumulative, like cracks forming in a windshield under pressure. Every new fix created a new strain. Every workaround introduced a deeper fault line. They didn't have anyone who understood how the systems interlocked anymore. No one knew that a vendor invoice timestamp affected a payroll trigger. No one remembered that we'd built a temporary bridge between the two systems during a budget freeze that never ended. And now that temporary bridge was collapsing under the weight of a modern platform that assumed everything was labeled and tagged like a textbook, not jury-rigged by a man running on bad coffee and half a decade of institutional memory. The real chaos kicked in 3 days later, when finance discovered that roughly 17% of employees had been overpaid and another 5% hadn't been paid at all. Contractors filed complaints. One person, I won't name them, but I'll admit I laughed when I heard, escalated to their attorney, which triggered a compliance review. That review uncovered mismatched audit logs and API access that hadn't been updated since Valerie's restructuring had shifted ownership of core credentials. And, as it turns out, when nobody knows who owns a system, nobody takes responsibility for maintaining it. I was told, again secondhand, that the first internal email asking who set this up was answered with silence. Then someone remembered my name. Then someone tried to find my notes. Then someone tried to open the folder, the one labeled Legacy Knowledge, Archived, and found a spiderweb of documents, all precise, all timestamped, all entirely accurate, and completely unexplained. They started passing around one particular comment I had left in an old code file, dated 3 years back, where I'd written, "Future devs, you should rethink this pipeline entirely, but if you're reading this and haven't yet, tread carefully. This is the glue holding 4 systems together. Break this, and you'll know it fast." Below it, the line of code in question had been modified 2 days prior by a junior engineer who had no idea what he was touching. An anonymous email began circulating among the executive team, and yes, someone leaked it to me, asking, why weren't these issues caught earlier? It's the kind of question that seems innocent until you realize what it's really asking is, whose fault is this? And when the only answer is the name of a guy they forced out with a fake smile and a box of company pins, well, that's when the silence turns uncomfortable. Valerie, from what I heard, didn't panic. Not at first. She blamed inherited systems, called it a temporary integration challenge, and told the board that a team had been assembled to address the issue. But her voice cracked during a company-wide meeting. Just once, but enough for people to notice. Because by then, the audit had turned up 2 more legacy configurations with compliance implications. Nothing illegal, just non-standard. And those 2 words are poison in the mouth of anyone trying to lead a public company. And me? I was at home, sipping coffee out of my Brightforge mug, the one they gave me after my 10-year anniversary, watching headlines on LinkedIn and reading between the lines of vague public statements. Operational adjustments. Infrastructure modernization efforts. We're actively reviewing our legacy frameworks to ensure alignment with long-term goals. I didn't gloat. I didn't post. I didn't leak anything. I just sat back and let the blueprint do the talking. They wanted to erase me. Thought they could scrub out everything I knew and replace it with clean lines and confident jargon. But you can't clean what you don't understand. And you can't lead what you've never held together with your own 2 hands. The system crashed. Not because I made it happen, but because they never understood what they'd inherited. And now, they're learning the hard way that legacies don't vanish just because you stopped mentioning the name of the man who built them. There's a certain rhythm to corporate downfall that doesn't feel like an explosion, not the kind Hollywood loves to dramatize with stock price graphs tanking in real time and sirens blaring across open-plan offices. No, what actually happens is more like a slow rot. The kind that spreads underneath shiny new paint, hidden by smiles and quarterly reports until someone finally taps the wall and their hand goes straight through. That was the atmosphere humming through Brightforge in the weeks after the migration crash, not full panic, not just yet, but a building tension, the kind of silence that's not calm but coiled. It started with a late-night emergency board meeting, one of those rare events that never gets officially announced, but that everyone in the company seems to know about the next morning. Valerie was brought in early, they say, hours before dawn, not to be screamed at, because this board doesn't scream, but to be surgically dissected. They asked polite questions laced with panic, calm tones masking rising heat. Why didn't you foresee these failures? Why weren't these systems mapped properly during the transition? And then came the one question nobody wanted to answer. Why does everything trace back to someone who no longer works here? That someone was me. Not because I was a martyr or a genius, or even the best, but because I had been the one holding the duct tape. Because every process, every patch, every quiet workaround that kept the machine humming had my fingerprints all over it. And now that the machine was making noises nobody could explain, my name had floated back up to the surface like a long-forgotten warning label. Valerie did what most leaders do in these moments. She deflected with corporate poetry, blamed legacy complexity, and institutional knowledge gaps, as if those things just appear on their own like rust in the walls. But the board wasn't buying it. That's when the consultants were brought in. Not the smiling kind with binders and coffee coupons, the forensic ones, the quiet team of suits and engineers who don't look you in the eye when they arrive because they already know something you don't. They combed through the infrastructure, line by line, system by system, and kept coming back to the same conclusion. Everything important was either built or maintained by someone who no longer worked there and who had never been properly replaced. I didn't know all this in real time, of course. I wasn't in those meetings, wasn't watching the video feeds or reading the minutes. But I heard the ripples. Old coworkers began reaching out, first cautiously, then with more urgency. One message said, "Did you know the inventory system flags every product twice now?" Another asked, "Was there supposed to be a backup protocol for the order gateway, because no one can find one?" But the best one came from someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. Just 5 words. "What did you do, man?" I didn't answer any of them. I didn't have to. Because I hadn't done anything, not really. I hadn't sabotaged a single line of code. I hadn't blocked any access or corrupted any files. I'd simply done what I was told. Leave behind everything relevant, no more, no less. I'd followed the rules. But the truth was the sabotage not because it was hidden, but because it was ignored. I left behind a mirror, and now they couldn't stand what was staring back at them. Eventually, the consultants issued their report, parts of which were leaked, of course, because someone always leaks the report when it's bad enough. The executive summary had a line that made me laugh out loud over breakfast. The infrastructure depends disproportionately on undocumented legacy systems and undocumented human knowledge that was never formally transitioned. That's consultant speak for, you fired the guy holding the damn map and then drove straight into the woods. Valerie lasted another month. Not because she handled it well, but because the board needed a fall guy and didn't have a replacement lined up. Her final message to the company was a stiff video recorded from her home office, filled with words like growth, future, and difficult decisions. What she didn't say was that she'd spent the last 4 weeks chasing ghosts through systems she never cared to understand, and that she left with more questions than answers. Brightforge didn't collapse overnight. That's not how real companies fall. What happens is you lose your rhythm. Projects slow down. Confidence erodes. Customers get antsy. Turnover rises. New hires walk into chaos and walk right back out again. Systems don't fail dramatically, they decay. And the company that once ran with a kind of gritty efficiency turns into a place where everyone's just trying not to trip over what used to work. And me? I watched from a distance. I didn't cheer. I didn't sneer. I just observed. Because my job was never revenge. My job was truth. And when they asked for a clean slate, I gave them one, scrubbed of nuance, stripped of context, sanitized of intuition. Because that's what they thought they wanted. What they got was an empty page. And on that page, they were supposed to write the future. But without knowing the language of the past, every word they wrote came out crooked. There's a kind of justice in that, I think. Not explosive. Not cinematic. Just quiet, earned, inevitable. They wanted to erase me. They got what they asked for. But I didn't vanish. I didn't hide. I just left the truth exactly where they could find it. And it waited.